That sound once echoed across the high plains of Wyoming every single day. The locomotive making it produced 8,500 horsepower. In 1958, that made it the most powerful single locomotive unit on the face of the earth. Union Pacific was so convinced this machine would transform American railroading that 11 years later, they scrapped every single one. This is the story of the most powerful locomotive America ever built, and the physics that killed it. To understand the big blow, you have to understand one railroad's obsession. Union Pacific wanted power. More power than any diesel could deliver. More power than steam had ever offered. It was the 1950s, the jet age, the atomic age. The age when American engineers genuinely believed that any problem could be solved with enough horsepower and enough audacity. And the gas turbine seemed to offer exactly that. What followed was one of the most fascinating and instructive engineering experiments in railroad history. A story about what happens when the right technology gets deployed against the wrong problem. Union Pacific's main line west of Cheyenne, Wyoming climbs over Sherman Hill, the highest point on the Transcontinental Railroad, at over 8,000 feet above sea level. The ruling grade approaches 1 4/10%. For a railroad trying to move the heaviest possible freight trains with the fewest possible locomotives, it was a perpetual bottleneck. In the steam era, the answer was helper engines, additional locomotives cut into muscle trains over the summit. Expensive, slow, and labor-intensive. The first generation of diesel-electric locomotives was transformative, but the most powerful single diesel unit of the early 1950s topped out at around 2,000 horsepower. To match a big boy steam locomotive's output with diesels, you needed multiple units. 5, sometimes 6. That meant more crew, more maintenance, more complexity. Union Pacific wanted a single unit with enough horsepower to handle Sherman Hill without helpers, without multiple consists, without the operational overhead. The answer, they believed, was already flying overhead. The gas turbine engine is elegantly simple in concept. Air enters the front, gets compressed, fuel is injected and ignited, and the expanding combustion gases spin a turbine that does useful work. Jet engines use turbines to produce thrust. Industrial turbines use them to spin a shaft. Attach that shaft to an electric generator. Attach the generator to traction motors. And you have a locomotive. General Electric had been developing industrial gas turbines for power generation. Union Pacific approached them with a challenge. Put one on a locomotive. The first turbine locomotives arrived in 1952. 10 units, each producing 4,500 horsepower. In 1952, the most powerful diesel unit made was producing around 1,600 horsepower. The turbine had nearly 3 times the output. On Sherman Hill, the results were extraordinary. Single turbine units hauled trains that had previously required multiple diesel consists. Union Pacific was ecstatic. GE was ecstatic. The railroad press declared that the future had arrived. By 1954, Union Pacific had ordered a second generation, 15 units, upgraded to 8,500 horsepower. 8,500 horsepower from a single unit. Nothing on rails had ever come close. A third generation followed, 30 more units, with a distinctive covered walkway running the length of the hood. Workers called them veranda turbines. The public called them something else entirely. The big blow, because that sound, that continuous rising jet engine howl, could be heard miles before the locomotive arrived. But underneath all that power was a fatal compromise, and it lived in the fuel tank. When crude oil is refined, the lightest products come off first. Gasoline, kerosene, diesel fuel. Each successive fraction is heavier, more viscous, less refined. At the very bottom of the process, the last thing out of the distillation column, is bunker C, also called residual fuel oil. It is thick as tar at room temperature. It has to be heated just to flow through a pipe. In the 1950s, bunker C cost a fraction of diesel fuel. It was essentially the waste product of the refining process, cheap, abundant, and widely available along Union Pacific's route through Wyoming oil country. Union Pacific designed the Big Blow to run on Bunker C specifically. The tender car carrying the fuel had to be heated continuously just to keep the oil liquid enough to burn. And here is where the engineering began to unravel. Bunker C is not a clean fuel. It contains vanadium, sodium, sulfur, and a range of metallic contaminants that refined diesel does not. Inside a gas turbine, combustion temperatures exceed 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit. At those temperatures, the vanadium and sodium in Bunker C form corrosive compounds that attack turbine blades with extraordinary aggression. The blades, precision machined to tight aerodynamic tolerances, were being eaten alive from the inside every time the turbine ran. And as the blades eroded, efficiency dropped, which meant burning more fuel to maintain power, which meant more contamination, which meant faster erosion. It was a self-reinforcing cycle of degradation. The maintenance intervals became brutal. Turbine blades required regular inspection and replacement, a labor-intensive process that required specialized skills and tooling that diesel maintenance simply did not. Union Pacific was building expertise in turbine maintenance that no other railroad possessed, and they were doing it on the most remote, high-desert railroad in America. The Bunker C problem was serious, but it was not the only one, because gas turbines have a fundamental thermodynamic characteristic that makes them problematic as locomotive power plants. They are highly efficient at full power, and dramatically inefficient at everything below it. A diesel locomotive at half throttle burns roughly half as much fuel as at full throttle. The relationship is relatively linear. A gas turbine at half throttle burns nearly as much fuel as at full throttle. The turbine must maintain a minimum rotational speed to function. Below that speed, it stalls. At maximum horsepower, the Big Blow's fuel economy was competitive. At the partial loads that represent the majority of actual railroad operation, acceleration, light grades, holding speed, it was consuming fuel at ruinous rates. The turbine couldn't even be shut down between runs without an extensive restart procedure. Burning Bunker C, degrading its blades, costing money every minute it sat. When Union Pacific averaged the fuel and maintenance costs across an entire service cycle, not just the mountain climbs where the turbine excelled, the economics stopped making sense. And the geography worked against it too. Sherman Hill was the hard part. But Sherman Hill was only a fraction of the run. For hundreds of miles of flat and rolling terrain, the Big Blow was hauling 8,500 horsepower worth of turbine machinery to a job that needed a fraction of it. You couldn't right-size it. You couldn't throttle it back efficiently. It was all or nothing, all the time. In 1966, Locomotive Division introduced the SD40, 3,000 horsepower from a single diesel unit. Reliable, fuel-efficient across the throttle range, and maintainable by any competent diesel shop in the country. The power gap that had made the turbine revolutionary in 1952 had been cut dramatically. You could lash up 3 SD40s and match the Big Blow's output, with better fuel economy, far lower maintenance cost, and the ability to split the consist as needed. Diesel units could be mixed and matched. You could add a unit for a hard grade and cut it off on the flat. The turbine was an all-or-nothing commitment. The blade erosion problem never went away. Every hour on Bunker C was an hour of degradation that no amount of engineering refinement fully solved. By the mid-1960s, Union Pacific was running the math. And the math kept coming up the same answer. In 1969, Union Pacific retired its last gas turbine electric locomotive. The fleet that had been the most powerful locomotives in the world was cut up for scrap. Of the 55 turbine locomotives, Union Pacific operated over 17 years. One survives. Number 18, preserved at the Illinois Railway Museum in Union, Illinois. It doesn't run, but it stands, a monument to the most ambitious locomotive program in American railroad history. Here's the part that makes the Big Blow's story genuinely complicated. Because the gas turbine wasn't wrong. It was just in the wrong place. Gas turbines in stationary power plants, running at constant full load, burning clean fuel, are extraordinarily efficient. They power cities. They balance electrical grids. They are a mature, essential technology. Every turbine rail experiment shared the Big Blow's core problem. The locomotive that needs to accelerate, cruise, slow, stop, and idle, on a varying schedule, on a long route, is fundamentally incompatible with a prime mover that thrives on constant full-power operation. On Sherman Hill, at full throttle, burning bunker C, hauling maximum tonnage, the Big Blow was exactly what it was designed to be. The problem was everywhere else. The engineers who designed and operated these machines were not wrong to try. In 1952, the turbine's power advantage was real, significant, and practically unmatched. The Big Blow failed for the right reasons. It was an honest engineering solution to a real operational problem, deployed before anyone fully understood the penalty of the partial load curve, and before diesel technology had matured enough to make the comparison stark. Union Pacific ran these machines for 17 years and moved millions of tons of freight across the continent with them. That's not a failure. That's an experiment that taught the industry something it needed to know. The Union Pacific Big Blow remains the most powerful locomotive type ever operated in regular American revenue service. 55 units, 17 years, 1 survivor, and a lesson about the relationship between peak performance and average efficiency that engineers are still citing today. Subscribe if you want to go deeper on the engineering experiments that shaped the railroad. The ones that worked, the ones that didn't, and the ones that were simply ahead of their time.